Really, I never wanted to write a book with them, and was not happy when they told me this one.
Right.
Hi everyone, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming tonight as we discuss Ed Southern's new book, Fight Songs, A Story of Love and Sports in a Complicated South. He's here joined by Daniel Wallace, Amarella, the events and social media coordinator here at Flyleaf Books. Thank you so much again for coming tonight and purchasing a book from us, which helps Flyleaf as we return to holding events in the store. To make sure we are able to provide access to our events for our community, we are recording this event and it'll be up hopefully tomorrow in our YouTube channel. Also, we do close at 7, so we're asking the authors to conclude before 7 so we can be mindful of our colleagues who are closing up the store after the event. And finally, I'd like to introduce our authors for tonight. A native North Carolinian, Ed Southern has been the executive director of the North Carolina Writers Network since 2008. He is the author of 4 books, including the short story collections Parlors and Jewels. His shorter work has appeared in South Story, the North Carolina Literary Review, the Dirty Spoon, the NC 10x10 Play Festival, Elsewhere, South Writ Large, and the Asheville Poetry Review. In 2015, he received the Fortner Award for service to the literary arts in North Carolina. He currently lives in Winston-Salem. And then we have Daniel Wallace. He is the J. Ross McDonald Distinguished Professor of English at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Go Heels. Where he directs the creative writing program. He is the author of novels like Big Fish, Ray in Reverse, The Watermelon King, Mr. Sebastian, and The Negro Magician, The Kings and Queens of Rome, and The Extraordinary Adventures. So, again, thank you so much for coming, and please give it up for our authors.
So thank you so much. It's so happy to be here to be able to talk to Ed about this book. I've got a lot of questions here, but they're just all variations on how about them heels. Heels, how about them? About those heels, how? You know? So I'm going to try to mix it up a little bit.
Okay.
And try to do it somewhat. I do have a ton of questions, but this is such a complex and potentially incendiary book, and I want everybody to know that. And one way that I noticed today as I was going back through it, you compare your wonderful wife favorably with the head coach of Clemson football team. How did that work out?
You know, I was thinking of him less, in that comparison, I was thinking of him less as the head coach at Clemson and more as another Alabama native with sort of working class roots and who just happens to be the head coach at Clemson right now, which interestingly enough, this is going to diverge wildly from where you started. You know, college football, big deal at Clemson. Who, by the way, is currently ranked one spot below Wake Forest in the AP top 25, we just have to mention, which is just killing all my Clemson friends. Their 3 greatest head coaches, Frank Howard, Danny Ford, and Dabo Swinney, are all from the state of and played at the University of Alabama. I feel like that is some kind of weird connection going on there, that even though Clemson fans like to act like they invented college football, they don't seem to do well without Alabama boys in their head coaching position. So,
And I think that people in Kansas would probably say the same thing about North Carolina basketball.
arguably so, yes.
Yeah.
Although Roy's from
They do.
here, at least.
Yeah. They do say that. Tell us about the essay that led to this book.
So I started writing that in, I guess, early 2019. And really, like, didn't know where it was going to go. I just felt like I needed to write something about this strangeness of being a North Carolina native and a lifelong Wake Forest fan who went and met, fell in love with, and married an Alabama girl, Alabama fan, during Nick Saban's, well, we didn't marry during one football season, but, right as Nick Saban was turning Alabama into the dominant force in college football again. And, not write so much about the sports aspect of it as about the cultural aspect between the Deep South and Tobacco Road. And why is it that around here we used to set our seasons by college basketball, whereas when you cross the line to the Deep South, wherever that line may be, it's all about college football. And once I started asking those questions, they just sort of led to more questions. Once I started telling those stories, they just led to more stories. And the essay kept growing and growing and growing. And I had published work before with South Writ Large, an online magazine that is edited by Robin Miura, who is also the editor-in-chief at Blair. And so I brought this essay, which had ballooned to something like 12,000 words at this point, to her and she said, this is way too long for South Writ Large to publish, but have you thought about turning it into a book? And I said, no, I don't think there's enough there to be a book. And she talked me into it. We had lunch and she, we got into discussing the topic and the topics. And by the end of it, she convinced me that I would at least give it a shot. And so then in the process of writing that book, 2020 happened. And what I had meant to be just sort of a fun, lighthearted look with sort of a side glance at deeper issues of Southern history, those deeper issues were sort of roaring to the forefront of contemporary life, and it felt irresponsible to not refocus the book to look at those a little more closely than I had expected to.
Right, and it would have been such a different book if you would have just had this little playful jaunt into this somewhat seamy side of college sports or the South. Yeah. But that tipped you over into a place that, in terms of this, it's just such an important book that I think you could just keep going. Right? Don't you feel that way? You could just keep going with this book.
Yeah. I have no intention to, but but there's an alternate universe in which, this book is about 3 times as long. I mean, there's so much that I left out, that I cut, that I just didn't get around to. So many stories that, and at the conclusion of the book, I spend a whole passage saying, I might should have told about this story. I might should have told about this. I make no guarantee that the stories I told are the right ones or the best ones, because there is so much. Once you dive into this subject, there's so many intersections that you can follow.
Yeah, and it's told with such passion, and that's one of the things that I loved about it, is that when you put love and sports together, it's hard. If you don't tell it with passion, then you're not telling a very good story. But that's what you do in this book, is you bring so many different parts of your life, of all of our lives, intimate as they can possibly be, but also as public as they are. Sports is that thing, right? Sports is the most public event, but it's also the most intimate.
It really is. I mean, and I love that way of putting it, that it's the most public and the most intimate at the same time, because, and I'll just say this is sort of telling tales out of school, that the essay that this began with, I had spoken to an editor at a magazine that considers itself the leading literary magazine of the South, and he liked the idea. This editor that I knew liked the idea, and he said he took it to his colleagues, and they said, "We don't want to do anything about sports. There's enough about sports out there. We don't want to do a sports story." And I thought, as I was saying this, as I've told a couple people on the signing line, this isn't really about sports. This is about the South through the lens of sports, and how can you grapple at all with the South if you're not looking at it through that lens? Because it does. The rise of college football, the rise of ACC basketball, so neatly parallels what C. Van Woodward called the bulldozer revolution. When so much of the South's population was moving off the farms, moving out of the small towns, moving into the cities. North Carolina was what Time magazine called the Dixie Dynamo, where we were doing things like building a research triangle park, which a generation before would have been unheard of. At the same time that UNC wins the 1957 national championship, and all of a sudden ACC basketball becomes the big money sport, the sport that captures our attention in North Carolina, as opposed to college football as it had been before. So I just think if you're trying to get some sort of hold on the South, some sort of mental handle on it, you can't not look at SEC football, ACC basketball, NASCAR, the Atlanta Braves, the Masters. I mean, these are play such a huge part in the fabric of our lives.
Yeah, I think Melville got Moby Dick rejected a couple of times because they said we don't want any more whaling stories. Enough about whales. I didn't realize that it was more than that. It took a long time. It doesn't take as long for this book to be accepted. And
well, thank you. I appreciate
Moby Dick had a long, tough road. I hope it doesn't happen to you.
I appreciate that. The story that I always heard about Moby Dick was that a professor found it, or a literary critic found it in a bargain bin in a department store, found a copy and said, "Oh, I've never read this by Melville," and read it, and then wrote the paper that convinced everyone it was the great American novel. So maybe 100 years from now, in some bargain bin or whatever equivalent we have.
That's why I always get excited when I see my books in the bargain bin. One day, somebody's going to come along and read it. Actually, I heard a similar story about the moviegoer.
Oh, yeah.
Which is interesting because that also has deals with a lot of the same elements and ideas that your book does in some ways. It just occurred to me, but that book, published the year of my birth, 1959, and it was discovered by somebody who was reading for the National Book Award. And just nobody had heard of it.
I think I heard that too. That it was just sort of like somebody published it but didn't really believe in it and just sort of got it out there, and then
well, I want everyone to hear you read from the book. I have never heard you read from it, so I want to hear the passion.
Well, see, now you're putting pressure on me.
Turn down the lights.
I think the opening would be good, given the setting. Once there lay a land, green and rolling, between a long chain of mountains and a treacherous sea. This land held only a couple of real cities, but a lot of jumped-up towns. The people who lived in this land didn't much care for one another, by and large. Not for the ones who lived in the land's far corners, not for those right across the state lines, not even for their next-door neighbors sometimes. To a visitor, the people of the land seemed more or less alike, but a resident could go on for hours about the foreign, foolish, and downright immoral ways of those who preferred to wear different colors while they watched young people throw and catch a rubber ball wrapped in leather. But for all they saw as foreignness, because of all they saw as foreignness, it could seem like most everyone in this land came together every year, just before spring sprung, to cease all daily business and watch the champions of their preferred colors compete in a tournament so all-consuming that they called it just the tournament. Once this tournament was 3 high holy days, 3 feast and festival days, all in a row. Friends and families gathered to wear their preferred colors in close proximity and eat traditional foods. The outcomes made stone-hearted men weep with joy or despair. Time passed. Things changed. The land increased its commerce with the greater nation, as it long had dreamed and striven for. natives moved away. Newcomers, many of whom knew little of the old ways and cared even less, came, with cables and satellite dishes that let them nurture distant loyalties. The land and its people pushed against their old horizons, and this was not a bad thing, not at all. But the land became less of a land, less cohesive and neighborly. Fewer and fewer in the land cared about the tournament, and nobody cared as much. Still in all, millions cared much and maybe too much, kept the old tournament seeped in their bones and speech and manner, and one of those millions was me. The tournament wasn't what it used to be, but then neither were we, and maybe never had been.
That does bring me to this point that you make and don't make over and over again. The line that you straddle in this book, very thin one, and because you have to go back and forth, and you're being realistic about sports, and especially sports in the South, that it's wretched. In almost every way. At the same time, but at the same time, there's so much there that is valuable to so many.
Yeah.
So how are you able to live with yourself?
Let's see. Oh boy, how do I answer that one?
How do anybody?
I
who
know.
loves sports.
It's because it is. It's. I think as far as sports go, I'm able to live with myself the same way I'm able to live with myself in the society that we live in the South. When the drive-by truckers line, the duality of the Southern thing gets quoted a lot. This is a place that is in some ways, uniquely beautiful and glorious and wretched, to use your word, at the same time. And how do you reconcile that? How do you live in that tension? And the same thing goes for sports, and especially college sports. Although, the National Labor Relations Board just yesterday, a memo came out where they've said that student athletes, at least at private schools, in their opinion, have the right to unionize and demand, have the same rights as employees, because that's really what they are. That's a huge step, in a year of huge steps. I really don't. The one thing I didn't want to do was have a hot take. Sports and sports media are dominated now by this whole hot take culture, where you're supposed to have, a strong opinion, and on one side or another, this is where I stand. This is my take on it, and I really wanted to avoid that. Not because I don't. It's not against taking stands. It's against falling on one side or another of an issue that is, seeing an issue in black or white that's often gray, is the best way I can put it. College sports have done great harm to the people that play them, to the institutions that have sponsored them, and oftentimes profiting greatly off of them, to sometimes the communities immediately around them, sometimes to the fan bases that follow them. College sports have also done great good to the people who play them, and to the institutions that sponsor them, and to the communities that surround them, and to the fan bases that follow them. I mean, you can't, if you feel that one side outweighs the other on the grand scale, okay. But I felt like you had to acknowledge, or at least I had to acknowledge in writing this book, that there is weight on both sides of the scale.
Oh yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, it is an uncomfortable argument to make that that the coach at Alabama is not getting paid enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's getting, how much does he get paid?
I believe his base salary is a little north of $9 million a year now. And that's just base salary. That's not bonuses for conference championships, national championships. That's not any of the other perks that he gets. That's just, the paycheck they write. And so, yes, in the abstract, that is obscene that a college football coach is making that kind of money for coaching a kid's game.
Right.
But when you look at the economic impact that Alabama football under Nick Saban has had, not just on the university, not just on the city of Tuscaloosa, but on the state of Alabama, when weighed against that, he's underpaid compared to the overall economic impact that he has had. It's not as large yet. I would dare say that Mac Brown has had a significant impact on the Chapel Hill economy, since he came and got people excited about Carolina football again. With basketball, I don't know because it's not the same. A basketball game isn't an event, an all-day affair in the way a football game is.
Right.
But I don't know. I know in South Carolina, especially in upstate South Carolina, they talk about the Dabo effect. The effect that Dabo Swinney. There are restaurants and hotels that exist in upstate South Carolina simply because of Dabo Swinney. There are people who have jobs at these places because of the success that Dabo Swinney has had at Clemson. And it's, when you factor that in, like I say, it sounds utterly insane to say this, but they're not making enough.
Yeah.
And that's on us as fans. So, sorry.
This is exactly what we're talking about in this book, and the culture that has spawned through these successful, quote unquote, successful programs that changed the landscape. The neighborhood that my daughter and her son and her wife, my daughter and her husband live in Clemson. Probably half the houses in their neighborhood are football houses, weekend football houses that have just been purchased for people to come in for the games and then leave. Which is
a whole other issue, considering the housing problems that we have in this country. But we won't even get into that.
That's your part two. No, this is. These are issues that they are addressed in these books, and you do come at it a little bit like Quentin Compson. I don't know if did I write that?
Yeah.
About you? Yeah. I don't hate the South. I don't hate the South.
Yeah, your blurb was fantastic, but you compared me to Nietzsche and Quentin Compson, and I was like, is this?
Let's do one of the
Is this meant to be praised?
It's you are in this very uncomfortable place of being an adherent in a way, and that's something we could address too. This idea of what sports, especially in the South, mean, and the symbolism that we partake through them. I feel like you touch on it in the book that the South is really fond of symbolism.
Yeah.
It finds it wherever they possibly can. And football has been a big one.
Football, it's interesting because people ask me all the time, like, well, what did you learn in the process of writing this book? And I would have assumed that it was the South that ladled all of the martial meanings onto football and onto college football. That all of the metaphors, for war that we have attached to football. That sounds like something that comes from the South. It wasn't. It began in the Northeast, just as college football did. The first recorded intercollegiate football game was between Rutgers and Princeton in 1869, less than 5 years after the end of the Civil War. So, the students that participated in it, their older brothers, pretty soon their fathers had fought in the war. And in part because, as the American version of the game evolved and became more and more about head-on confrontation and possession of territory which is not really a feature of rugby or soccer. Those are much more fluid games. But you're trying to move towards the opponent's goal, but they're much more fluid games. It's more of a back and forth. Whereas American football is literally measured and marked and chained. You have a chain gang on the sidelines marking out each 10 yards. And you are driving into enemy territory. The warlike connections became obvious, and those were already there when the game came south. And so in some ways, this game, it's all about territorial possession or conquest. And, this game with these warlike connotations was just sort of tailor-made for this blood and honor culture of the South that was looking for a new outlet and a new expression that could be yoked to the new industrial commercial economy. Like how do we, we can't have gentlemen fighting duels anymore. How do we give, we want to teach our young men to, fight for their honor, but they can't go around shooting each other anymore. How do we, here comes this game, football. And, it just sort of took off from there and hasn't really stopped.
Yeah, and it really is amazing because I would reading the book, I would think, well, that's going too far here. And then I think, wait, he's not going far enough. And it's both of those things are true, I think, because you have a quote and there's somebody saying that an Alabama championship was revenge for Gettysburg.
Those were newspapers at the time when, first when Alabama upset Penn, University of Pennsylvania, in, I think it was 1922. Because for a couple, football came south in like the 1880s, 1890s, and for a couple of decades, the South played terrible football. But the South would argue that, our football players are the best in the nation, which is kind of a recurring theme in the South. Is that, it's objectively bad, but we still say it's the best in the world, best there's ever been. And then, because the South was poor. And then in 1922, Alabama first upset Penn in a regular season game. And newspapers at the time wrote about it as this was our revenge for Gettysburg, like literally said. And then when Alabama won it was after the 1925 season, the 1926 Rose Bowl, when football fans across the nation were outraged that Alabama had even gotten an invitation to the Rose Bowl, because who wants to see a team from the South play football? Again, they were trumpeted not just in Alabama but across the South, and a lot of it was this is revenge for the Civil War. This is this is how we're getting back against the North, even though it was a team from, I think, Washington State was who they played and beat. And I'm sure these guys from Seattle were like, what did we have to do? But anyway, it was very much, and that became the cliche for a long time. Even today, even people say, the SEC's motto is it just means more. Well, why does it just mean more? And a lot of people will say it's like because they're refighting the Civil War, even though that ended a long time ago. There are whole other grievances that we're on about now.
Yeah, it's so much to this. The very public historical part, and then in this book there's the really deeply personal part, which is your courtship of the woman who would become your wife, who is from my hometown and who worked at the best bookstore in Birmingham. Worked for Jake, I don't know if you knew that. And she's an Alabama fan.
Yes.
And as a Wake Forest fan, that's like who put my peanut butter or chocolate sort of thing. Like, wait, how did these two things go together? Do you think that you could have had a successful relationship with her if you had been, say, a Duke fan?
That's really strange.
Yeah, wait. What was I saying about we can't fight duels anymore?
or let's say a Kentucky fan or another big school, as
Yeah.
opposed to something, as she says, adorable.
Adorable.
Like Wake Forest.
Oh, it's adorable. So the story is the first time my now wife was visiting Winston-Salem, and I drove her by the Wake Forest football stadium. She went, "Oh, it's adorable." Like, really, honey? And as I say in the book, it's like, I mean, I do adore it, but still, that's not what you want to hear. I don't know, and I talk about that a little bit. Like, I don't, honestly, because we are both way too wrapped up in college sports, and especially college football, and because we're both intensely competitive, which is like one of the big obstacles to our relationship anyway. If I were a fan of a team that Alabama considered a rival in any way, and not necessarily, I don't even mean like Auburn or LSU, like a traditional rival. I mean like a, well, now Clemson. I don't know. I don't know that it worked. It would cause a real strain. As it happens, Alabama and Wake Forest have never played each other in football, and they're usually seen. For those of you who aren't football fans, they're usually held up like if it's shorthand. Like if you want to talk about, if you need a shorthand for a dominant college football program, you're going to say Alabama. You need a shorthand for a football program who has had a lot of success lately, thank you very much, but is still seen as like a program that nobody really cares about. You're going to say Wake Forest. We're the smallest school in the Power Five by a couple thousand. And most famously, for any of you who are Steely Dan fans and know the song Deacon Blues, the chorus is, they've got a name for the winners in the world. I want a name when I lose. They call Alabama the Crimson Tide. Call me Deacon Blues. The best part of that is it turns out they weren't even aware of Wake Forest when they wrote that song, which is even more fitting for Wake Forest football than if they've been trying to insult us. So I don't know. Like, I honestly think it would be a real challenge to our relationship if we were fans of, in any way, rival schools, or even like you mentioned Kentucky, an SEC school that, no one in Alabama considers a rival, or Vanderbilt.
Right.
Another black and gold school that no one in Alabama considers a rival. But that would play Alabama from time to time. That would cause a real strain, I think, honestly. And that's kind of sad to admit, but it really would.
But completely understandable, and to somebody who wasn't raised in that culture, maybe hard to understand.
Yeah.
Hard to understand. I mean, I hate Alabama so much. I mean, I grew up hating them. We were the only Auburn fans in forever, around me for infinity. Alabama beat us continually, and people would come over to our house and roll our yard with red and white toilet paper. They would spray paint the score in our driveway every year, and it was, my parents met at Auburn. They were married in Auburn. They chained themselves to a pole in front of Toomer's drugstore to get money for a hotel room because the GI Bill wouldn't pay for their hotel room after their wedding, and they only needed $10. So it's playful, but it's at the same time it's not really all that playful.
It can be, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I joke a lot in the book, and I say at one point that I'm only talking about sports hate, not actual hate, which is not the same or shouldn't be the same thing. But there are times when, since I'm in Chapel Hill, so my closest group of friends, bunch of guys, about 6 of us, all of us North Carolina natives, half of us Wake fans, half of us Carolina fans. And so we have gone with each other, I was here in 2015 which was the last time Wake Forest played here, and Carolina just blew Wake out of the building. It was ugly. And we honestly, there's just an unspoken understanding that we sort of, we parked in Carborough, we ate lunch at Carburritos, we walked together, down Franklin Street, we walked together through the campus to Keenan, we all kind of sat together, and like there's just an unspoken understanding that after the game, we just sort of go our separate ways. Even if we're riding together, we'll just sort of walk separately back to the car. And it's just, because we understand that the emotions are going to be very raw at that point. And there is great opportunity for misunderstanding, for, saying the wrong thing or saying the right thing, but it's taken the wrong way. These friends were with us in 2019 when Carolina came this close to coming back and beating Wake. I mean, Wake barely won a barn burner. It was a great game. And one of my best friends, who's a lifelong diehard Tar Heel fan, at the end of the game, final clock goes up, and me and the Wake fans are just breathing this huge sigh of relief, and he just stood up, shook my hand, good game. Walked off. And that was it. And that's what you have to do to preserve the friendship, I think.
Oh, absolutely. I have a good friend lives on my street, 3 doors down. We see each other once a week. We make up drinks and thrust them on each other. But really wonderful guy. He teaches at Duke. Fine. Occasionally during the basketball season, he will ask if Duke and Carolina are playing, would you like to come over and watch it? What?
Yeah.
What are we talking about? How would that work?
Yeah.
Really, how would that work? No idea.
I mean, yeah.
But he's a nice person otherwise.
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, and I do. I'll admit this once and never again. Even though it's going on video, I actually have great affection for UNC in some ways.
Wow.
We'll see how I feel come November 5th, which is when Wake comes back here to play.
I do want to open it up for a couple of questions, but before I didn't want to forget. As I was reading this book, I heard an echo of this other book that I loved. And I couldn't remember what was it. And then I realized it was A Fan's Notes by Frederick Exley. Have you ever read that book?
Actually, no. I should have.
It's a great book, and you will love it. You will totally love it. It's just about a writer writing about sports and his life. It's a novel, but it's told with that same.
I'm aware of it, and I knew the title because the title kept occurring to me while I was writing this, and I think it was sort of an anxiety of influence thing that I was like, yeah, I better not read this twice.
I'm glad that you haven't.
I need to get not just done, but like in my past a little bit before I get around to reading that.
After November 5th.
Maybe have to be longer than that. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. So, anybody like to ask us a question about sports or love?
I guess I'll only comment on the idea of the rivalry within the marriage of having different, my wife and I live in a neighborhood that's equal distance from Duke and UNC, and a great number of families in that neighborhood are, one is from UNC and one is from Duke, either working or going to school there. And I've always wondered, I don't necessarily see the inside, but I have often wondered how that works out on game nights.
And I'm not really. I'm going to kind of respond to that with an anecdote. When Jamie and I first started dating, I was surprised to find out that she didn't really hate Auburn because she had a lot of friends who had gone there. Mm-hmm. Her sister actually had gone there briefly. She was friends with a quarterback from her high school who had become Auburn's quarterback for a few years, and she liked the guy and wanted him to do well, except in the Iron Bowl, and who she really hated at that time was LSU and Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And in fact, so I had this, or still have this bluegrass compilation CD that began with the Osborne Brothers' Rocky Top, which I was aware was the fight song for the University of Tennessee, but that wasn't my first association. To me, being from ACC country, being on this side of the Appalachians, it's just a good song. And we were on like our first road trip together. I don't even remember where we were going, and I didn't even remember I had that CD in. I turned it on and started playing, and Rocky Top comes on, and I'm just sitting there humming along, and boy, Jamie's gotten awfully quiet. And I turn and look, and for the first time of what would be many times, I'm getting the death glare. And she's staring at me like, what on earth are you doing? And I'm like, what's the matter? Oh, God, the song. I'm so sorry, you know. But after Cam Newton, she does hate Auburn, if that makes you feel any better. Yeah. Auburn moved way up in her hate rankings. But yeah, it is, because it is funny, like, you know, you do have to share this space together, and as serious as the rivalries are, and as real as those feelings are, there's also something like artificial about them in a cathartic way, I think. That, you know, like I love teasing other fan bases. And every now and then people will give me a hard time about, like, I wrote an article for Wake Forest magazine about 2 Wake Forest graduates who were doing organic farming. And I said something about, you know, farming being the punchline for a state joke. And the editor made me take it out. Come on, you know. I mean, it's what we do. But, I mean, I think it's fun. I think it kind of lets you get rid of some of this, you know, animosity in a, one hopes, fun and irrelevant sort of way.
Yeah, that's the hope.
The hope.
That is the real hope. Because there is an argument to be made, and you don't make the argument, but you let somebody else touch on it in the book, that what sports really are is a cult.
Yeah.
Sports are a cult.
Can be.
Yeah. We don't know these people. We don't, you know. I mean, I've often thought, you know, when I'm certain basketball teams at UNC, I just, you know, it's just I fall in love with them and all and the players, and sometimes I think they wouldn't want to hang out with me. They just wouldn't like me that much.
Yeah.
You know, why would they want to hang out with me? And it's true, they wouldn't. Why am I so affectionate towards these guys?
I mean, it's a great, and I'm sure psychologists have dove into this, but yeah, you know, you put extraordinary loyalty onto these, you know, 18 to 22-year-olds who, don't know you from Adam and wouldn't want to know you.
No.
And yet, you know, and we do form opinions about them as people based on what they do on the field or the court. It's I mean, the more we talk about it this way, the like, I'm even questioning my fandom more than when I was writing the book. But I mean, it really is a very irrational way to go about life, and it can be taken to truly harmful extremes, you know, to varying degrees. But like I say, I think at its best, it is some, you know, I'll use that word cathartic again. I think it's a great way to, you know, purge yourself of certain emotions. And it's also a great way to feel a sense of community that many of us don't anymore. You know, you know, we still have neighbors that we don't really know well. You know, we you know, we'll nod at them maybe. We have one neighbor down the street who won't even wave as she drives by. You know, we don't, you know, even in our own neighborhoods, we don't feel that sense of community that we once did with the people who live right around us. And I feel like sports, again, it may be an artificial community, but it feels very real, or it can if you're a sports fan. And it does give you a sense of connection that is increasingly hard to find.
And with sports, it's also the people with whom you're finding community may not be people that you would necessarily want to find community with in any other way.
Very true.
You know, I mean, when you have people like getting rid of all their Alabama football merchandise when he comes out and says Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
You know, and that's another thing. It's who are you sharing community with?
Great question, because there are lots of Wake Forest fans that I would not care to have a meal with. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, say Jesse Helms was a Wake Forest fan.
I didn't know that.
He left Wake Forest short of graduating because he got a job at the News and Observer, but he went to Wake Forest.
He was a sports reporter.
He was a sports reporter for the News and Observer. So that, yeah,
Love the tie, by the
thank you very
way.
much. I appreciate it.
You have
Jill's out here in support of Wake Forest.
I didn't mean
Yeah.
I'm claiming it.
Are you wearing red and white boxers to just?
No, I don't have any.
All right, note to self.
Yeah.
I have a question. Ed, you've just gotten back from Alabama, talking about this book, and I just wonder if you thought that the people there that you spoke with had a different sort of take on the book and different interest than up here at Tobacco Road.
Not really. Now, obviously, they would, we get more questions about the football part of the book than the basketball part. But the themes were the same. The themes that they were curious about were the same as what people ask me about here. I will say, when I was in Tuscaloosa, I sat down for the conversation and looked, and there was a woman in the front row wearing a Wake Forest jacket. And I immediately hopped right back up again and I said, I think you're maybe the third person other than myself that I have ever seen in the state of Alabama wearing Wake Forest gear. I've got to say hello to you. And she was a Wake Forest graduate. Yes, Wake Forest graduate getting her PhD at Alabama. So we had a great conversation.
It's just the depth, the complexity, the interesting side lights in this book. Everything about it is. I'm really hoping that other people don't approach it the way the editor of that so-called literary magazine of the South did, as a sports book. It absolutely is. It's so much more than that, I think.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm curious back to the Steely Dan song,
Okay.
because I was even thinking recently, Wake is a Baptist school, so we get why it's a deacon. But how many other teams have a deacon?
So, no, none. Yeah, none. I mean,
it's like a deacon.
right. All right.
What is that at the end?
I get asked
deacon.
a demon deacon, which I think, obviously, I'm just a little bit biased, but I think it really, I think it's a fantastic mascot. And it comes from, it may have been a News and Observer article, actually. It was a newspaper article that referred to a Wake Forest team, and I think they had beaten Duke, as a matter of fact, and said, they beat the Blue Devils like demon deacons, or some, it was just a play on words that was just one of several nicknames that they had for a while. At one point, the team nickname was the Baptists, which
It's total immersion.
It's I know, it's like it's perfect for basketball. They dunk their opponent.
Exactly.
And it's not even a Baptist school anymore. But yeah, so the story with the Steely Dan song, the story that I heard when I got to Wake was that one of the guys in Steely Dan had started his college career at Wake Forest and hated it. And so he transferred to Bard College where he met the other guy and they formed Steely Dan. And then years later, he decides to write this song simply to insult Wake Forest because he hated it so much. And because they did have, historically the worst record in Division I college football. But then, in 2015, I think it was Donald Fagen that was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, and they asked him about Deacon Blues, and he said, yeah, I'd never even heard of Wake Forest. He said, we knew Alabama had, the best team in football, and so that, they call Alabama the Crimson Tide, and we were just looking for a line to match it with, and the only other football figure he could think of was Deacon Jones, who was an all-pro lineman for the LA Rams at the time. And he said, and we liked the way that Crimson and Deacon, there's a slant rhyme, they're both, have the same number of syllables, same stress. Crimson Tide, Deacon Blues, they felt just went together well. And then years later, someone asked him about, so why do you hate Wake Forest? And he was like, what's Wake Forest? Which again is so very fitting when it comes to Wake Forest.
Anybody else have a question? So what is going on now? Are you working on anything?
Trying to. This is very much a humble brag, and I apologize for it. I've got a bunch of ideas, and I'm having a hard time deciding which one I want to pursue.
Well, why don't you share them with us? And we'll know.
Oh, that would be great. Inspiration by committee.
Yeah. You've been, I had no idea in the introduction, you've been in charge of the North Carolina Writers Network since 2008.
Yes.
That's a long time.
That is a long time.
You've been helping writers all this time. It's remarkable what you've done,
Oh,
and
thank
all
you.
the writers in North Carolina are so thankful for everything you've done.
I took over a very strong organization. Really, my job was simply not to mess it up. So,
No, he improved it a lot.
Yeah, I would say
thank you. That's very
there's
kind.
a lot of positive change
Um,
and visionary stuff.
So if there are no more questions, I'm out of questions.
Well, I do have.
Oh, 1 second.
So when I was growing up, because I'm a little older, there was something called the Carolina Classic.
The Dixie Classic.
The Dixie Classic,
Yeah.
which was 2 South Carolina schools and 2 North Carolina schools
Okay.
that played. This is the Carolina. It's the Clemson, South Carolina State, and Carolina all played in Charlotte. And Bill Friday killed that because there was gambling involved, and some people that were players from North Carolina State were getting paid in the parking lot for shaving points. And Friday just said, "You're done. No more of this."
Wow.
But every study of sports in Europe or in the U.S. shows that the gray to dark economy of sports is actually larger than the exposed one. So what did you find out? I'm into the book, but I haven't seen gambling mentioned.
You know, I didn't really get into gambling. I did mention it, of course.
Yeah,
You know,
I do
talked
remember
about-
you did mention that there's you call it a gray economy, but there's a black economy. It's even.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, but the great economy, I meant things like NCAA
bets.
tournament pools
Yeah, French bets and
that
bulls,
everybody
yeah,
does. I didn't mean
exactly.
like the hardcore gamblers,
No.
and you call it a dark economy. More and more places are legalizing gambling,
Yeah, exactly.
including sports gambling. It's you know
Oh yeah.
coming into the light,
Well, you
for better
certainly
or
see
worse.
this in Europe.
But yeah, I did talk about the Carolina Classic was in Charlotte. I thought you were talking about the Dixie Classic that was played in Raleigh.
No, that was that
With
to
the
my
Big Four,
knowledge. To my knowledge, there was no.
Bill Friday shut them both down for the
Shut them
same
both down
reason.
for the same reason.
There was gambling going on, and so he just
I think he
both.
wouldn't care so much about the gambling. It was like paying off the players.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing. Yeah, the gamblers. It was too easy for them to get to the players
If
and
they
say,
were just playing, then it would be,
Yeah.
it's hard to shave points at a football game because there are too many players.
Yeah.
No, seriously,
Yeah.
That's why people thought that you couldn't rig until the Black Sox that you could rig the baseball game because there are too many players.
Right.
You'd have to have too many of them in the pool to
Right.
do it,
Right.
which they achieved. But so people gamble at Wake Forest. They actually bet, and is it all about stress?
I would know nothing of such activities. I mean, Wake Forest is no longer a Baptist school, but there's no gambling, there's no drinking.
I wondered if
There's
you
no-
gambled. At
We were in bed by 9 o'clock every night, my 4 years, and up by 7 a.m. every morning.
It's a military school.
No, we're just that diligent. We're serious about our academics.
Well, that's,
Not what I heard.
you know,
All right. Thank you guys for coming so much.
Thank y'all very much. And thank you to Flyleaf.
Hello. Okay. thank you again for coming and supporting Flyleaf. Please keep an eye out on our website and our newsletter for upcoming events. We have a lot of both virtual and in-person events, and you can book a seat of it ahead of time. So good night. Thank you.
Yeah.